Good morning. This is the Eager Beaver Show.
You are listening to a True North Eager Beaver Media Incorporated podcast. The True North Eager Beaver podcasts are proudly brought to you by our founding sponsors, the Misfit Mysteries from Corvid Moon Publishing, your source for science fiction, fantasy, and cozy mysteries featuring a broad diversity of characters, CanadianTarot.com, your uniquely Canadian online eclectic tarot community, and the Pepper Master, hot pepper sauces made from farm-fresh ingredients to thrill your taste buds and expand your mind. Well, good morning and hello, kids and cubs, and welcome to season 5 and episode number 754 of the Daily Beaver Morning Show. Do. Always 100% Canadian. Today, recording day is Monday, October 6th, 2025, and it's a great day here at the Beaver Lodge. I think we might have gotten a little bit of rain overnight because we are doing a small little renovation project here. We have some wood on our front porch and the back deck, and I think the front porch was pressure treated wood and had never been stained, so we thought it might be a good idea to do that. And the back deck, whatever was used to stain it, it's been done a while ago, and it was looking pretty sad. So we're giving it a little touch up. But of course, I went outside this morning and to go check in the garden and stuff, and the deck was wet, so I think we may have gotten a little rain. So we might not be applying the stain today. We've been doing the prep work for it to be able to get ready to stain it. So, but yeah, we got a little rain, and it is gray here at the Beaver Lodge. And well, we do need the rain, so I'm not going to complain. But yeah, I could have used a little sunshine today, though. I won't. I won't lie. It would help me feel a little less sleepy. I am your host, the Eager Beaver, pronouns he, him, hey, Mr. Beaver A, and not with me as usual is my good friend, Mr. Grizzly. A big thank you goes to our podcast's founding sponsors, the Pepper Master, the Misfit Mysteries from Corvid Moon Publishing, and PsychicTarot.ca. Kids and cubs, how is your mental health doing today? Hope you had a good weekend. I'm doing okay. Nothing bad happened. But I am severely sleep deprived. As some of you may know, I go through, so if you've been here for a while, I go through some bouts of insomnia from time to time, and I'm in a bit of one that is also not being helped by my beaver sweetie, who I love and adore, snoring. So, um, I have gotten, I don't think I've gotten 5 hours over the last 3 nights. So I am a little slower than I am usually. I have to focus more intently in order to follow things, and it has made me forgetful. And the other day, I'm hoping to get a phone call, but coming back from rehearsal 2 days ago, I have a satchel where I carry my EpiPen and wallet and stuff, and I had my bag because we had a choreo, and so I took the backpack, but I left the satchel on the bus. And I got off at the grocery store to do groceries. And when I went to pay for the groceries, I realized I did not have the satchel and therefore not my wallet. So I'm hoping that a very kind Samaritan returned it to the bus driver and that I will be getting a call today because otherwise it means I have to spend a lot of time renewing cards uh, and stuff. So, replacing the EpiPen that I just bought. Oh, God. So I am hoping that it is returned. Fortunately, I had my phone and my keys in my pocket when that happened. So at least I have my phone and my keys. But yes, wallet, cards, ID, EpiPen, uh, and uh, let's see. No, not keys ID. Keys I have with me. But yeah, wallet ID, EpiPen, and a couple of other things. I'm sure were in there. Or oh, and my bus pass, of course, that I just bought for the month. Yay! So it would be nice. Just the EpiPen and the bus pass alone is about like $200, right? The cards you can put a lock on. That's fine. It's just a pain in the butt to have them renewed. But it's just like, oh, please, I just spent that $200. So hopefully, Good Samaritan will call. But that's what happens when I get into insomnia. I lose focus and I tend to lose things or fall asleep on the bus going places, and then miss my stop by a lot and end up late. Things like that. I've fallen asleep on trains and missed my stop on trains when I've had bad stuff. Try to get off in Kingston and wake up in Belleville. It's like, oh crap. So yeah, these are weird things that happen to me, and when you have insomnia. So yeah, so in that sense, a little bright sunshine would give me a pop and help wake me up a bit. I was falling asleep during rehearsal yesterday. At one point, the director was like talking about stuff, and we are just like sitting on the ground, and I decided to stretch out on my back, and I fell asleep twice. Micro sleeping. I don't think I snored, but I did fall asleep twice. So, but today, fortunately, I have a lighter day before rehearsal this evening. So hopefully, I'll be able to get a nap in this afternoon. All right. So yeah, not like I said, not terrible stuff. Although like losing the satchel's not great. But yeah, just tired, really tired. Um, okay. Let's look into the magic monitor and see how the kids and cubs are doing today. Here we have Kit Lane saying, "Good morning, everyone," and it's a toasty day in Windsor. Kit Taffy G says, "Good morning" as well. Grace says, "Morning, DAMFAM," and said was at the beach yesterday. In Was at the beach. I'm not sure. Yestering, I think that might be a typo or it's a word I'm not familiar with. In October, fabulous. Yes, I think it was last Thursday. I was at the Ottawa Beaver Lodge, and I dined outside, and I was like, final al fresco of the year. Who knows? We're like that, aren't we? We try to hold on to the last second, to all that summery goodness. Let's see, who else do we have here? Kit Linda M reminding us that it's 25 days until Halloween. I love doing that. Okay, Kit Uncover. Joke. Why did the beaver get a medal? For showing true knowledge under fire. Ooh. Profiles in Norwich. My. We have Kit Jetty here saying good morning, as well as Kit Saucy. Good morning to both of you, dear ones. Uh, time for a sleep divorce. Yeah, I did move to the bed in the guest room around 4:30 this morning, but I was up. I didn't fall back asleep. But yes, tonight I might have to start the night in the separate bed. See, but the problem is that that means no cuddles. You see, you can understand my predicament, right? It's if I want cuddles, I can't get sleep, and if I want sleep, I can't get cuddles. But I need both. I need both like I need oxygen. Lie see, the proof that you can have it all, just not all at once. We have Kit Laurie with us this morning. Good morning to you, dear one. We have Kit playing with 3D here saying good morning all as well. Hey, yes, lovely. Thank you for joining us. Kit Janet S is with us also saying good morning all. Who else do we? And that's everyone here this morning. Thank you so much for popping in and saying hello. All right, let's get into it. I have an interesting show for you today, Kits and Cubs, because we are going to be focusing on things of a budgetary nature uh, with our Interim Parliamentary Budget Officer. Has been making some statements, testifying at committee, and been on the interview circuit since being named. I think he was named in early September. The former Parliamentary Budget Officer, Yves Giroux, who was our second one ever after Kevin Page, retired, I guess, or I'm not sure if he retired completely from the public service, but had announced a while ago that he was leaving. And so we have an interim parliamentary budget officer, as we talked about briefly on the show. P.E.I and the Conservatives have been trying to make a lot of hay that the next parliamentary budget officer that was named was an interim one and not a full one, trying to set the stage. Is the Prime Minister scared of what the parliamentary budget officer is going to say? He's going to try to silence him and all that kind of stuff. And neither of us know, none of us know whether or not the guy, Jacques is his name, whether or not he actually wants the job permanently, right? So, I mean, that has to be one thing. But number two, yes, he's the interim one, but yeah, I mean, Mark Carney is a central banker. If he's going to have a parliamentary budget officer, there might be certain skills and abilities that he would like that person to have, and would like to have an open competition for the position, right? So we have an interim parliamentary budget officer, uh, but he's been. Ooh, I got fuzzy all of a sudden. What the hell happened there? Um, I do not know why it is doing that these days, Kits and Cubs. I'm sorry. Just there we go. We'll fix that. And for some reason, the light all changed as well again, where I am washed out. There we go. Let's try that there. There we go. Not sure how this keeps happening. All right. So uh, he has been testifying in committee as would normally happen around this time, not necessarily this time of year, but at this point in the budgetary process, because we're not doing a budgetary process at the time that it usually happens, but would be giving a testimony and their assessment and all that type of stuff. Pierre Polyev has had some pretty wild numbers. Um, we know that a certain number of them and a lot of these statements are completely not true because thanks to other people that we consult in other places where we get our information, um, you know, uh, the numbers Pierre is presenting are really weird. And we know that Pierre likes to select the number that is the most dramatic, whether it's the real number or the number in percentage, or, if crime went up from 1% to 2% in a year, Pierre wouldn't say crime went up 1%. Pierre would say crime has doubled. Right. So because it's doubled, it's gone up 100% from last year, is much more dramatic than saying crime went up from 1% to 2%. Right. So Pierre likes to have fun with numbers. So when they say, it's gone, beef has gone up, the latest one, right, is, beef has gone up by X percent, and this has gone up by, he lists like three or four things that have gone up by more than 20% since allegedly since Mark Carney took came to office. Now, is that the price of beef went up 20% in real numbers, or was had the price of beef been up 3% in total since uh, when Mark Carney had come into office, and now it's at 3.6%, and that 0.6% more is 20% of 3%. Oh, beef's gone up 20%. Right. That's the sort of the way you have to look at Pierre, because he always has fun with numbers. So you always have to fact check everything he does, and he throws so many of them. He's gotten the habit of throwing so many of them in a whole diatribe that just to get through a minute and a half of him speaking, you have to go look at 6 different sources to see, well, did he lie about lumber, and did he lie about crime, and did he lie about, and yes, most of the times it's a lie or an embellishment or uh, a clever way of interpreting the numbers to make them look way worse than they are. Now, I'm not saying that things aren't bad, right? We've talked on the show a lot about how this economy is being experienced in different ways by different people, depending on where they are in the economy, whether or not they're renters, they're homeowners, whether or not they have shares. If you have shares right now, if you've got anything in precious metals right now, uh, you're feeling pretty good. But the reason you're feeling pretty good is not good at all. The reason for it, right? It's like when we're playing tennis in October, like this, and we still don't have a big shirt on, and it's lovely, 19 degrees Celsius day, and it's, oh my God, it's so great to be playing tennis in late October. Yeah, but why are we playing tennis in late October? Oh yeah, right. Yeah. Because we might not soon be able to play tennis at all in June and July, right? So, with Pierre, like I said, you always have to ask, like, from when that number starts, what number is it? What does it actually represent, and all that kind of stuff? Because everything with him is to make this government look as bad as possible, make Mark Carney look as bad as possible. It's the same strategies he had with Justin Trudeau. Everything they do is terrible, is crap, has the reverse effect. Things only get worse. And oh my God, how are we ever going to survive? And all that type of stuff. They're driving us into a ditch, and they're censoring the internet, and none of the things that they claim actually ever happen, right? It's all um, super melodrama on steroids, and a worst case scenario, and doom, doom, doom all the time with them. So you got to take a lot with the grain of salt. Um, so just the naming of the parliamentary budget officer as interim was enough for them to, like, cast aspersions and put out the suggestion of insidious motive and all of that kind of stuff. The parliamentary budget officer, as we mentioned, has been touring and giving the testimony, and he has been saying that our current numbers are pretty much unsustainable. And he's even said words like shocking and stupefying when he was in committee. That Pierre is like, he loves a good quote, unsustainable, shocking, and stupefying. He's been going around and saying that. And says, oh my God, this is so terrible. What is Mark Carney is, gee, I was being nice to Justin Trudeau. That's not fair to say he's just like Justin. He's worse. And, right? I'm thinking, oh, I'll skip you, Mrs. Justin. So, but is that really the case? And I was listening to the data, and I had presented something that had come out when Mr. Giroux was still the parliamentary budget officer, who had an assessment that we could increase our spending by about $46 billion a year and still be sustainable. Um, so a lot must have changed between the time Mr. Giroux said that, when he's only stepped down about a month ago, and the new parliamentary budget officer saying that things are unsustainable, shocking, and stupefying. Um, that's a big switch. Usually, when you have successor after successor, um, because these institutions tend to err more on the side of actual conservatism, and not conservatism in terms of a political leaning, but I mean conservatism as in, not wanting, um, out of all the situations that they could possibly assess, right? If they say, well, this is the best case scenario, they will never opt for first the best case scenario. They will always add, the possibility that things will be worse uh, than they could be in the best case scenario, because you want to give, you don't want to overpromise, right? In this case. So these are people that tend to hold back, right? If anything, there's going to be a drag rather than if they're going to miss, right? It's because things are going to turn out better than they expected and usually not worse. Okay. So they try to give you use of what are the reasonable scenarios, what could be the worst of those rather than the best of the reasonable scenarios. Um, and then take a number from that. So if in the case, right, of the worst of the most reasonable scenarios, we're saying that we can add $46 billion per year to our spending and not be in great trouble yet. And then you have a new person coming on with the announcements that have been made so far saying, hey, this is unsustainable. A lot of people will wonder, whoa, wait a minute, what changed? So over the course also of the past few weeks, we've been hearing lots of stuff, and as we mentioned on the show, about the deficit potentially coming in at $100 billion or more in the next budget. And I think the maximum I think that had been promised at one point I think was at 62 billion or something, and we're going to exceed that. So again, Pierre has been trying to milk that cow until it's dry as well. But he's been talking about it as if it would be like an exorbitantly higher number. And I was first thinking with all the announcements or something like this, okay, well, maybe people are saying 100 billion and it'll come in at around 80 or something like that. And then people are going to go, oh, well, that's not so bad. It turns out we're not even based on numbers that were coming in. This is numbers from the current interims that says that things are not sustainable. We probably won't be crossing 70 based on what they have now. There's still more things to come in, and there's certain things that are not factored in, like the budget, the efficiency, and the cut exercises that they are trying to put into place at the moment. And of course, for defense spending and all that kind of stuff, well, it depends when. In that 5-year cycle, some of that money is coming out, but there's a big chunk coming out this year to get us to the 2%. That's the thing that we committed to doing in this fiscal year. So there are things that are in there. There are things that are not fully yet calculated in there. So it's the best number you can give at the time, right? There'll be more adjustments, particularly when the budget comes out on November 4th after that. Problem is, with all the things that the interim parliamentary budget officer has been saying, is that the previous two and only two parliamentary budget officers we've ever had, Kevin Page and Yves Giroux, have been publicly uh, expressing some doubts about, if not the soundness of the assessment, um, the wisdom of already, some would say prematurely, declaring the situation unsustainable, which could give one the impression that perhaps the interim parliamentary budget officer would like the job if they are trying to make themselves memorable somehow in the way that they're doing it. It could also explain why it is that Pierre was so quick to want to initially set the groundwork for the fact that this government might want to have a new parliamentary budget officer rather than the interim one because they don't like what the interim one is saying. The interim one saying things that made the other two parliamentary budget officers turn around and go, really? Are you sure about that? Sure you want to say that right now? Might not ultimately uh, be a good look if it is if it he does want the job permanently. Um, again, you know, if we're if we wanted if I were a cynic, I would say that Pierre or the Conservatives are maybe familiar with the interim parliamentary budget officer and know which way that he tends to lean. Um, but that's if I was being a cynic, which I am not. Is I also don't think that I would be very surprised if that actually happened. Now, it's not that the guy is not experienced. He's been at the Department of Finance since 1998. So don't let his younger look fool you. This is a person with experience. But yeah, it is a markedly different enough assessment of the state of the finances than the previous two PBOs uh, are seeing if they were talking today. Now, one of them has much more distance. Kevin Page hasn't been PBO for a while, but he is, working still in the overall general field, with I think a think tank or something of the kind. And Yves Giroux has only left the position, about a month ago. So I mean, he's pretty familiar with the latest numbers. So again, if it was just one, that would be interesting. But two of them are expressing. We have an expression, un bémol. They're putting a dampener on the. I won't say explosiveness, but on the if you want to put it this way, when you listen to central bankers talk, when we showed you the clip about Tiff Macklem after the interest rate debate cut, he, he's within a rather um, narrow range of emoting or of language, right? It's pretty stead, often neutral, like this. And therefore, when a central banker comes up and says that something is stupefying, well, everybody really pays attention because that's not language a central banker would tend to use. They like to stay right in the middle. So, same thing with parliamentary budget officers. So, uh, I don't know what the word is, but I guess the level of superlative in the language maybe is the term that I'm looking for. It is a little interesting. So here we are going to present. We have a little clip from Canadian Press, I think, that sort of sets the table for things. And there's a series of interviews, either with the interim parliamentary budget officer or the post, the last two in there, where we're going to go through and look at things and look at statements and see things, how things have evolved over a couple of weeks. With what the interim parliamentary budget officer is saying, and then what the other two, a little more éminence grise, if you would like to say, who have been in the position, have to say. And there's also Michael Wernick in this as well, who I believe was the former clerk of the Privy Council, if I'm not mistaken. All right, kids and cubs. So first of all, let's take a what light that is ah, I I clicked on the wrong one. There we go, kits and cubs. So we're going to start with a little thing from the Canadian Press, and that will set the table for the overall clips and discussion that will follow. Just make sure that everything is set up. Yes, it is. Here we go.
Canada's Parliamentary Budget Officer has found in a new economic and fiscal outlook that Canada's deficit for this fiscal year is nearing $70 billion. Now that's up from just over $50 billion last year, according to Jason Jakes, the interim PBO's estimates. This is significant because he's finding that the level of debt that the government is planning to take on to fund its ambitious spending plans to ramp up infrastructure, other major projects in Canada, is going to add to Canada's debt at a faster rate than we originally expected. Canada's government has fiscal anchors that it sets. The new government under Prime Minister Mark Carney has tried to tie it to deficit to GDP. That's a ratio that will show that as long as Canada's economy is growing and the deficit isn't growing quite as large, that we're prudently managing our finances in the government. Now, previous governments have used different fiscal anchors, including debt to GDP, keeping that on a declining scale. The PBO, Jason Jakes, finds that this government is no longer on track for a declining debt to GDP ratio, and that deficits will no longer be capped at 1% of GDP, suggesting that under previous definitions of responsible fiscal management, this government might be slipping. Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne has insisted that the government still does have fiscal anchors. One of the anchors that the federal government is tying its fiscal responsibility to is declining deficit to GDP. It says that this ratio will decline over the medium term. And the PBO's report does, in fact, show that deficit to GDP, while it is expected to rise a bit this year, should decline over the preceding years. So the current Parliamentary Budget Officer, Jason Jakes, is only there on an interim basis. The Liberal government didn't have time to appoint and get one approved by the House of Commons before the outgoing PBO, Yves Giroux, left earlier this month. So Jakes, a longtime member of the office, is stepping in on an interim basis. Now, the Conservatives pushed for the Liberals to make this interim PBO permanent, and we will see after a rather scathing report if the Liberals are still willing to do so. It could be telling, as the Conservatives have accused the Liberals of wanting to fire the PBO should the officer present any numbers that are counter to what the federal government is looking for.
All right, so that was a bit of a primer by the Canadian press. A lot of the things that I mentioned before are in there. And so, yeah, a little note in there you maybe didn't catch. Right, we've been using debt to GDP ratio a lot. It seems that this government is going to prefer to look at deficit to GDP ratio, which of course is a bit of a different metric here, right? Here, deficit to GDP ratio represents a government's annual shortfall between spending and revenue as a percentage of its economic output, indicating a flow measure. I'd have to read up a little bit more on what a flow measure is. In contrast, the debt to GDP ratio shows the national total's accumulated debt at a point in time, also as a percentage of its GDP, reflecting a stock measure. So, yeah, I'm going to have to look at what's the difference between a flow measure and a stock measure. So, yes, the annual deficit contributes to the accumulation of the national debt. Therefore, sustained deficit can lead to a higher debt to GDP ratio over time. So, yes, it looks like there's going to be a switch then to a deficit to GDP. So, what are the deficits that we are accumulating annually rather than what is the total debt? And then how are we sustaining that? So, I'm going to guess it's probably, if we're saying a flow versus a stock term, it gives you a bit more of a more immediate metric of what you're doing currently. How you're able to afford it relative to your GDP currently versus the ability, I guess, to service the entire debt. So probably this is me just guesstimating. I would have to ask an economist friend of mine, Mr. Gray, about that. But it would seem, if I'm understanding this correctly, that deficit to GDP is more of a measure of your current ability to take on more debt based on how much money you're making now versus your ability to service your debt based on the amount of money you are making now. And if Kit PNC Bio is here, maybe in the chat, would be able to give me a quick confirmation because he seems to know about such matters as well. All right. So there are some anchors, but some of the anchors are going to change a little here. So in the first interview that we have with the Interim Parliamentary Budget Officer, this is about 2 weeks ago. So probably before some of his testimony, but shortly after the governor of the Bank of Canada um, announced that, whoops, sorry, announced that we would be having an interest rate cut. Trying to get the story because there we go. This is the one. Because I got several interviews lined up here to do this portion. So this will be me jiggling, or juggling, I should say, not jiggling. Yeah, here's some juggling for you. Juggling some various clips. So yes, this is 2 weeks ago on, I believe, Power Play. It would be CTV's Power Play. And we start with Vashi Kapelos asking him, in light of the recent interest rate cut announcement, and he gives a quick assessment, a little bit on his take on how the economy works. So I'll make sure that we're all lined up here for you, kits and cups. I'm not sure if you're hearing the sounds when I'm going oops, because I'm setting up some of the video and sometimes the thing is not on mute, and I'm not sure if that's coming through or not because I don't have the thing on share, so maybe it's not coming through, but I don't know if it isn't at all. So there's Mr. Jacques, and here we go with the first question.
Mr. Jakes, pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you. Thanks so much for the invitation to be here.
Thank you very much for coming into studio. I appreciate it. We just heard from the Bank of Canada governor about his view of the state of the Canadian economy and really how I think U.S. tariffs and the trade war with the U.S. is impacting the economy. What is your view right now on the way in which that set of information is impacting the finances of the government, or could impact the finances of the government?
And again, building on the statement from the governor today, it's evident that the Canadian economy is not necessarily in the best shape. I think, as the governor put it, it doesn't necessarily feel particularly rosy out there right now. Even if we're going to have positive growth going forward, it's not going to feel particularly great. And there's a direct linkage with respect to the state of the nation's finances, so the government's budget deficit. As you probably are aware, we published our last economic and fiscal outlook just before the election. And things have gotten a little bit worse since that time on the economic side. Certainly, uncertainty has continued to persist. It's certainly built with respect, uncertainty certainly increased with respect to our trade with the U.S. and the potential outcome of trade agreement renegotiations. And you're really starting to see it in terms of undecided business investment and also some impacts on labor markets. So, of course, over the course of the summer, 100,000 Canadians losing their jobs. So it's not necessarily the economic side. And of course, if you don't have a job, you're not paying taxes. You expect some sort of supports from the government, either through employment insurance or other types of supports. And of course, the combination of lower revenues and higher expenses means higher deficits overall.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask, particularly on the revenue side. If the economy in the second quarter is contracting, the trend continues and unemployment is up and unemployed people need help from the government, will that, in your view, ultimately have a depressive impact on revenue? Like, is it almost a foregone conclusion?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's the way in which the federal finances are structured. During periods of downturn in the overall economy, deficits increase because spending increases. We have a social safety net. It's in place so that when people across the country face hard times, collectively, as Canadians, we've agreed that the federal government is going to step in and help people out, both in the short term to make sure that they're not going to lose their homes, but also over the longer term to make sure that they can receive retraining so they can move into their next job. And then at the same time, while they're doing that, it would be pretty unfair to ask them to pay taxes on money that they're not earning. So of course, revenues go down at the same time. But hopefully what we've seen over the past 75 years, once we get out of the recession and once we get out of this sticky economic situation, things start to turn to the positive side. So the deficits should start to shrink.
In the interim, while we
Okay. So, by the way, when the economy regains, deficits should start to shrink, is another way of saying the budget will take care of itself, for those who are paying attention. But yes, here you get the sense here, of course, the overall flows and why it is that a government will take on some debt. And of course, at that moment, as we said on the show, if the Bank of Canada is cutting interest rates, it's not because the forecast is good, right? So, uh, bolstering the governor of the Bank of Canada's position with that. Um, Now, in this answer here, talking about the importance of the upcoming budget and a little bit again about the slightly different presentation, where it's going to have an operational budget, an operational balance, and it's going to have a capital balance or a spending balance, investment balance there. And the numbers are going to be presented. There's still going to be one overall number at the end, and that's the number that Pierre is going to focus on because that number is going to go up. But the Prime Minister is going to show the difference between how much it takes to run Canada day to day and try to get that budget, that part of the budget, balanced, and then showing us the investment budget. Here's the money that we are spending on things that should get us stuff back, either generate jobs or added economic growth or that type of stuff, things that will boost our GDP after they are done, and have them in another one, and saying that because we're at this critical time, we need to spend this money, which is going to create an interesting situation for Pierre because they are going to oppose the budget, right? But if the Prime Minister can show that operational spending is going down, and then the capital spending is really what it is, more responsible for the rising annual deficit, then he can turn around and ask Pierre, well, which of these things would you not spend on, Pierre? Which one of these projects do conservatives disagree? Where should we pull money from? So it does create that dynamic. And there's probably not going to be any of these projects that the conservatives are going to be able to say that they disagree with. And it's going to put them in a sticky situation. So Pierre might be strategically overplaying his hand already, or Mark Carney might be setting up a rope-a-dope here, and Pierre will dope that he is might be running right into it with this. But yes, presenting these two numbers, and it's something I personally approve of. Armini Yalnizyan also has expressed positive observations with regard to presenting the budget in this way, and it's probably a wonder why we haven't presented the budget that way in the longest time, because you do have to make some investments every now and then, which means you have to incur some debt, but it's for something better in the future. So yes, he's going to talk about this a little bit, the slightly different presentation, because it's going to be new to Canadians, and therefore, when something is new, that does open a lot of doorways for someone who's of bad faith to try to set the frame. Through what color of lenses we're watching this, rose-colored or dark lenses, right? So that's what Pierre's going to do. He's going to try and set the stage for us to look at these numbers in the worst ways possible as well. So let's listen to what the interim parliamentary budget officer has to say about these 2 points here. Okay, and again, just making sure we're all set up here for you.
Just in this period of uncertainty, and while the negotiations, for example, around CUSMA are still to start and then become ongoing, there's a lot of focus obviously on this budget. I know you're well aware of that. We haven't had a budget since April of 2024. How important is this one?
I'm at great pains not to engage in hyperbole. So this budget ends up being important.
You're definitely not a politician then, yeah.
No, well, this is easily one of the most important, it's one of the most important budgets that we've probably seen, I've probably seen since I started working in the Department of Finance in 1998. So we have a budget where it needs to address a fundamental assumption in our economy and how our economy worked, and that was we are tied at the hip with the United States, and that's gone. So all of our historical economic modeling that was based upon the idea that don't worry, as the US recovers and grows again in 2, 3, 4 years, we have those connections and those supply chains, and things will start to take off for us. That's gone out the window at this point. And so at a macro level, what we're looking for, certainly on our side in the budget, is a plan, an economic plan that will demonstrate how the federal government expects to intervene and provide those supports as part of the transition. Again, going back to the point that the governor made today with respect to monetary policy, he indicated there's no going back, there's only going forward. And in the case of monetary policy can help in the transition. It can't necessarily fix all the problems. On the fiscal policy side in the budget, similarly, we're looking for how the federal government's planning on supporting that transition. I think the other aspect, and something we're really interested in and we're watching carefully, is the government's indicated that they're planning on changing the overall presentation of the budget. So going from what people are kind of used to, so a bottom line, deficit, surplus, how much money you're borrowing, that type of thing, to having those numbers and then also presenting things a little bit differently. The government hasn't clearly indicated what they have planned at this point, but that's something we're watching carefully.
They haven't communicated that to your office yet? Because I know a number of months ago your predecessor also said, like, I don't know what the difference will be yet. Like, I don't know how they're going to define it.
Yeah, they've consulted with us on some ideas, and at this point we're still waiting until budget 2025. And on our end, obviously, if you have a really important budget, probably, as I mentioned, and critically important budget that parliamentarians are going to be voting on, having multiple votes on very soon, if things are presented differently, if they can't quite understand what's in there, then obviously for us, the Parliamentary Budget Office, the organization that supports parliamentarians of all stripes, regardless of whether they're good with calculators or not, we need to make sure that they're supported in understanding what the government's actually proposing.
Do you anticipate you'll...
So there you go. Kids and cubs. I'm having a little trouble here. There you go. All right. So again, a little idea of the different presentation. Again, how it could be new. It could definitely be, like I said, that it is going to be harder to understand or compare in the first part already opens the door for there to be some misinformation, which is not necessarily intentional, right? Or ill-intentioned or in bad faith. Sometimes you can just get things wrong and put your interpretation out there. But also, of course, disinformation, which is the stock and trade of the Conservative Party of Canada. And, we expect that our politicians, when they talk about it, would know, because that's their job, to read the bills. And if they don't understand, there's a whole bunch of resources there that they can tap into to explain it to them, like they're 3 years olds or 6-year-olds or 12-year-olds, and then they can come back and explain it to us. But that does not seem to be what's happening. They seem to get the news and the piece of information, and they go into a room with how could we spin this to our advantage, rather than how can we do our jobs of informing our constituents. Hence the disinformation, rather than just misinformation, which is a mistake, that a genuine, honest mistake that gains traction, right, and that other people start sharing. Whereas disinformation, which is intentionally putting incorrect information out there, with a view to making it harder to actually find the information, the actual information, or trust it. So again, also in this answer, he states, I take great pains not to engage in hyperbole. Um, I'm not sure how long that lasted, given that about a week later he was in committee saying shocking and stupefying. But okay. Just these are types of things that you have to be consistent, especially if when you're out there making the first impression, you say, I don't want to be prone to hyperbole, then you need to stick with that then. Uh, and then, of course, they get into here after in this discussion about the size of the public service, and of course that there's going to have to be cuts. Federal government is saying that it will achieve it through attrition. A lot of people are expressing skepticism that this can be achieved strictly through attrition, or at least natural attrition, just people dying or retiring on their own. There'll be more discussion in the other interviews on other types of strategies that can be used, and then and some of the downsides, the potential downsides of working through attrition. But a lot of people are saying it's not possible. The federal government didn't necessarily promise downsizing the public service, but it did. I believe it did announce the plan to actually cap it. So the public service is estimated at being about 440,000 people. Leaving it capped at 440 rather than growing it more. But of course, within that, how the people are organized and who's doing what where and how many bodies in certain places, as we're going to have things like, for example, defense procurement that's really going to pick up and they're going to need more people there. CRA, for example, they really need more people to pick up the phones. So, if people are going to be taken from one place and moved to another and retrained to do that type of work, let's say, or creation opportunities are going to be created for people who are in jobs that are more precarious to reorient themselves to other things that are available in the public service. Right, that also is a thing, right? You want to, and you'll see points to that effect as well. You're right. You don't just want to say like, oh well, these next 10 food inspectors are aging out, and therefore we're not going to replace them, and just have all the burden on the ones that are there. The food inspectors, you need them, right? It's kind of important. So. There are places that have to remain somewhat constant. There are places that have to grow, and then there are places that, can be cut, I guess. And then, of course, depending on shifting priorities, there are places that you're going to have to set up. But if you're looking at, like, for example, the Major Projects Office, they've set up a new office. There's a lot of people that were working on these types of files that are now going to be working under the Major Projects Office, not necessarily going to be new people or staffing from zero. There are people that have been working on that are going to go and work there. Now they're going to have new mandates and new work procedures and stuff like that. But it's still going to be, they're going to bring their experience with them, and then they'll hire whoever else they need to support the new mandate as needed. So it's I said it's not always about wiping the slate clean and starting with fresh new bodies. Some people can be moved around and all that kind of stuff, but you're going to want the shape of the public service is going to change as well, depending on which departments or greater priorities are going to have more money flowing through them and which are going to have less as well. So there's all those things to manage as well. When you're trying to cap the public services, making sure that the various priorities are properly resourced at the right levels and with the right experience, and not just waiting for people to retire or die off and saying, okay, well, great, it's been achieved. You still have to maintain the quality of the programs. All right. So moving to our second interview. So that was about 2 weeks ago. This is about 9 days ago when he, and it's Jason Jakes. Sorry, I said Jacques because it's spelled the French way. And I always, when I see something spelled in French, I always go French first. But it seems that it's Jason Jakes and not Jacques. So this is 9 days ago on a CPAC. And right off the bat here, and he got into it a little bit with Vashi Kapelos, talking about how things from our relationship with the United States has changed, right? The fact that we can, if the United States was getting a sniffle and we knew that a cold was coming, we could prepare. And if the things started if the fever started to break in the United States, all we had to do was wait a couple of weeks, and then we would know as well, right? So, sorry, my phone's ringing here, and it threw me off. So if things got better in the United States, that all we knew was we had to wait, and then we would be our boat would rise with that tide, is what I was trying to say, and that's changed. So here, in the first part of this interview, Michael Serapio, who's the host here, is asking about certain things that have changed.
Well, joining us now is the Parliamentary Budget Officer, Jason Jacques. Mr. Jacques, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Listen, you are obviously sounding alarmed right now about the state of the government's fiscal standing. So I guess I want to begin with a very simple question to you. Are we in trouble?
We're on the path to being in trouble. So that's what our 5-year forecast, the numbers that we released earlier this week, indicate. That if left unchanged, the fiscal path that the government's currently on will definitely result in us being in quite a bit of trouble and having to make some hard decisions.
Now, in getting here, what do you attribute this to? Is this like Donald Trump's trade policies, the roosters coming home to nest, or is this about government spending priorities and not controlling it?
I think it's kind of a little bit from column A and a little bit from column B. So there definitely is an impact in comparison to our previous forecast. You can definitely see the impact on the overall growth for the Canadian economy. A larger part of it is the government policy decisions. So there ends up being about $115 billion in net new costs since the last time we prepared a forecast back immediately prior to the election in March 2025. And a good part of that is attributable to defense. So changing geopolitical environment, priorities for the government to increase spending on defense, which we saw that was announced in June, earlier this year in June, and of course on the tax side, on the revenue side. So $6 billion a year, so about $30 billion over the next year, plus revenue that we're no longer going to have because the lowest personal rate went from 15 down to 14. Mm-hmm. But yeah, certainly a little bit of both, but certainly at this point, it's more on the government policy side or government initiative side.
Okay.
All right. So here, the abrupt changes we've made to our defense policy, and where we're going to be spending some money here, some various things that we've done with regard to taxation, particularly money that we are no longer taking in, are also having some impacts here. So there are some major changes that things that have changed. You will notice that his demeanor is a little more calm, less animated in this one, a little more gravitas in this one. But in that previous interview that was 2 weeks ago, so maybe about 5 days earlier, there was no mention of general mention that things weren't great, because obviously, as we mentioned, the Bank of Canada cut its rate, which is generally not good, a sign of good stuff, but not in the sense here, the overall expression of as an opening bid of concern, right? That is a distinct change here. Now, in the next answer, we're going to talk a little bit about the thing that we mentioned before, one of the fiscal anchors being that they were limiting the deficit to not more than 1% of GDP, and it seems that we will be exceeding that. I'm not sure by how much. I don't think it doesn't look like it's going to be that much, but we will indeed be exceeding that over the next few years, as we have to put that amount of money into these particular sectors. So let's set up. Okay, here we go.
Okay, so help me understand this then, because as you say, there was a projection before the election, but we also are getting very clear messaging from the previous government that principle, and the one that they always seem to lean on, of their fiscal guardrails, was ensuring that the deficit would not exceed 1% of GDP. Does that mean to say that that guardrail meant nothing?
I think the guardrail obviously meant something. Otherwise, they wouldn't have established it. And I'd say like one of the key principles of any guardrail is, again, like when it's simplicity, so you can easily identify it. The second one is flexibility. So when the context changes and when the economic environment changes, potentially owing to factors outside of your control, you have the flexibility to end up changing that guardrail. It doesn't mean that you should eliminate all guardrails, but potentially the guardrail that you'd set previously ends up being a little bit unrealistic.
Okay, so unrealistic in terms of keeping it below 1% of GDP.
At least according to our baseline forecast for the next 5 years, it appears to be unrealistic. I'll take that back. It's going to be a challenge for the government to maintain that. Okay. It's not to say they can't, and it would simply increase the amount of pressure around the hard decisions they would have to make in order to get us back to that place.
Yeah. Although, to be fair, this was a Trudeau government guardrail, so we'll have to see what the Carney government does. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And again, the underlying principle around guardrails, again, different countries have different types of guardrails, have different types of fiscal targets. The most important part is you have fiscal targets, and they're clear, and people understand what they are, both internally within government when they're putting together budgets, and also externally for the public, so they know they can easily assess, is the government on track or is it not on track, to actually respect its original objectives around fiscal management.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that last piece of data here is particularly important in that one of the major fiscal guardrails that we had in place during the time of Trudeau and Freeland was the debt to GDP one. Now we're moving to deficit to GDP on this one. So that will be a slight change for Canada with regard to that. So just important to note that this is one of the reasons that he is bringing this to light. But it also counters any conservative claims that we have no guardrails. It's not that we have no guardrails. It's just that the guardrails that we are using are going to change. Now, of course, that opens the door to, oh, well, you're picking easier guardrails that, easier targets for you to hit. That could be fair. That could be unfair. I don't know enough about that in this case. And I'm sure we'll learn more over time if that happens. But it's right up there, like when the Conservatives started using GDP per capita rather than just GDP at a time when our population was growing a lot, which meant that the GDP per capita could only but decline and thus create them the narrative, right? So they are using, disingenuously using GDP per capita, not for the reason for which that metric was necessarily created, right? It's to weave another story. So we've seen it done. It can be done. It opens the door to that type of allegation. So that's another reason why this would probably be mentioned in this case, right? Because you don't want that happening. You don't want the international markets believing that you're choosing metrics because you believe they're easier to attain or they'll make you feel, make you look better, but because given how the situation of the economy's changed, these are the ones that we have to look at now. I could see Mark Carney coming up to a microphone and explaining, it's like, yes, but because we have to take on a lot of capital expenses right now, and we want to do what he says, to get the most return from scarce public dollars or something, that line that he uses often, because we have to make sure that, that we use the greatest amount possible without crossing a threshold in order to move things along at a speed that the situation requires. for example. I could see him making that type of statement, and it probably there would probably be a lot of truth to that. If you've got a hole in your roof now and it's leaking now, and there are thunderstorms in the forecast for the next 3 days, you probably don't want that hole in your roof during those 3 thunderstorms, because the damage it could do to the rest of the house is even greater. So if it costs you a lot more to fix your roof now, you're probably still going to do that in order to save, to not have to incur costs to repair other things at the moment, which means that, yes, even though normally you wouldn't take on this amount of debt, um, the situation requires it, and you just gotta, right? But you still want to look, okay, if I have to take on more debt than the situation requires, uh, how far can I go if I'm making reasonable cuts and restraints in other places in order to make that happen, because the situation is so dire that it requires it now, right? You got to look at different metrics in that case. So, and probably maybe not forever, because for a short period of time that's particularly defined. But yes, it might be important to look at other metrics at other times. And this might be such a case with the way that things are changing. Again, that's just my best speculation, given I'm not an economist. But I can see someone making that type of argument. It's an argument that sounds good to me, but economists who know their things could tell me why that was a good argument if it is one, or why it's full of crap if it's not, right? And why it just sounds good. But yes, these things are happening here now. In this particular answer, and I also have to catch myself here, because I made the whole point about saying Trevor Jakes, because Vashi Kapellas called him Trevor Jakes, and here Michael Serapio called him not Trevor. I know a Trevor Jakes. I'm mixing them with somebody I know. Jason Jakes. And in this case, saying Jason Jacques. So forgive me. I assumed, Kits and Cubs, that the people who actually interviewed the man got the proper pronunciation of his last name before introducing him on the show. So I figured I got him wrong when Vashi Capello said Jakes. But now that I heard Michael Scarpio say Jacques, I don't know what his last name is. I'd have to hear him say it and how to properly pronounce it. So forgive me if I am pronouncing it wrong. Okay. So how the unknowns could change the forecast. Let's listen to the Interim Parliamentary Budget Officer on this one.
Okay, and when you say that, and I think it bears repeating that when you look at essentially the number you present this week, there's basically a $17 billion difference between what the expectation of the deficit would be and what it is now being projected as by your office. So when you look at those numbers, though, you've not yet accounted for the national projects, other government programs, nor have you accounted for the fact that the Prime Minister, Mark Carney, has asked all his ministers to look at departmental savings. Will those affect your final projection, your prognosis?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've included everything for which we have sufficient detail to actually assess both the likelihood and the likelihood of implementation and the scope of implementation and the likelihood of potential savings or additional spending. If you look on our website right now, there are multiple information requests that we sent in to various ministries across the federal government, asking them for additional details regarding recent announcements that have been made by the government. So in particular, thinking of the $13 billion housing announcement that was made a couple of weekends ago, just asking them for details regarding, how are you spending the money? When do you plan on spending the money? What are you going to spend it on? So we can actually incorporate it within the forecast. I think for us, again, we're focused on getting the details around what the plan looks like. A very relevant and other important question for which we're going to have to come up with some sort of answer is how effective will the government be in actually implementing its plans? Mm-hmm. And in particular with respect to any type of expenditure review or spending reductions.
Okay, quickly running out of time. Yeah. what is your message then to Canadians right now? With the number that you've found, with your report, what is the takeaway you want Canadians to have?
It's a very serious situation. And everyone, it's a serious situation. Canadians' anxiety is well placed. And our numbers and our report simply confirm what everybody knows. And hopefully on November 4th, there'll be more clarity regarding how the government and how Parliament plans to actually solve some of these problems.
Okay. November 4th being a budget day with the Carney government. Jason Jacques, thank you for this. We'll talk again.
Thanks for the invitation.
All right, kids and cubs. So we have that from Jason Jock. Again, at the end with this takeaway, still subdued. Nothing, no mention of anything being unsustainable, shocking, stupefying here. Right? So that's why something changed somewhere along the way, which was a little interesting. But here, talking in that last response about a couple of, there's some data points that he still doesn't have yet. So there are some unknowns that when he gets data could change the forecast that he has at the moment, and giving you his general sense of takeaway that, if you're feeling anxious about the economy, that, you're not wrong to be feeling anxious, and you're not. we can attest to that as well. You're not wrong for feeling anxious whatsoever. The numbers are sort of confirming what we're all feeling. Yes, there's definitely some contraction. We felt it, and we saw the numbers from the second quarter confirm it. Hopefully, some slight expansion now, as we saw for the first GDP numbers for the first of the 3 months of the new quarter, the current quarter. But even if it's growth, it is somewhat slow growth, and as you mentioned, I think in this one or the previous ones, it's slow growth that doesn't feel good at the moment. So now we move to so we had 2 weeks ago, 9 days ago, and now we move to 7 days ago, and this is where unsustainable starts coming in to his vocabulary. So this was on CTV's question period, I believe.
We'll start today with the federal government's expected deficit spike. The Prime Minister has already signaled the size of the deficit will be, quote, substantial due to the economic impacts of our trade war with the U.S. But the Interim Parliamentary Budget Officer this week is sounding an alarm over just how substantial. Jason Jacques is projecting the Liberals will post an annual deficit of $68.5 billion this year, up from $51.7 billion last year. And that the federal debt to GDP ratio will increase over the medium term and remain above its pre-pandemic levels.
It's not a funny fiscal outlook. It's a really serious fiscal outlook. And we don't lightly use the word unsustainable, right? Unsustainable means you don't have the option of saying, maybe I'll wait a couple of years, I'll see how things go. It means if you don't change, this is done.
Joining me now for more is Jason Jacques. Hi, Mr. Jacques. Good to have you back here in studio. I appreciate you making the time.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation.
Our audience would just have heard a little snippet right now of what you told committee this week about the fiscal outlook that you presented. You said it's not a funny fiscal outlook. It's really serious. Why did you say that?
Well, this is in the report we clearly indicated that based upon the path we're currently on, by our estimates, it raises significant concerns with respect to the sustainability of federal finances.
What does that mean in layman's terms? I'm asking because we hear that word a lot from economists, particularly when we're talking about deficits or balanced budgets, what and what isn't sustainable. When you say that you have concerns about the sustainability of our financial picture here in this country, what in layman's terms does that mean?
I think certainly from our perspective, we're at the precipice. So we haven't gone over the precipice. We're kind of looking out over the cliff at this point. And we're at a point where based upon our numbers, things cannot continue as they are. And I think everybody knows that, right? So what we've done is we've taken what everybody's feeling in terms of the anxiety across the country at this point, positive economic growth that doesn't necessarily feel very good, and we've actually put numbers around it with respect to the federal government's deficits over the next 5 years. And for us, it's really important to set the table for parliamentarians so they know what to expect, so they have a better sense of the overall context within which they're going to be presented with Budget 2025.
So what's at stake at the precipice? Like, if you fall over the cliff, what's there? If you're able to go the other way, what's there?
Obviously, you don't want to go over the precipice. That's probably...
Like, what happens, though, if you do?
Nothing good. And nothing good. And I think for parliamentarians, and certainly I think all Canadians are very much aware of the challenging economic times that we're in, and the fact that we're going to have more challenging times as we go forward, both in terms of trying to manage the deficit. So there isn't a lot of fiscal space the government has to actually work with at this point. But I think also more broadly looking at the restructuring of the Canadian economy. So something we've touched on as part of the committee hearings, and I think other people have highlighted, is this world order that we've had for the past 75 years is done. That both has geopolitical considerations around additional spending or increasing spending on the defense side, which is definitely a spending pressure. It also has immediate pressures in terms of the Canadian economy and the definitely the attenuating or the diminishing of the linkages with the U.S. and our need to find other linkages outside the country. So in short, it means a lot of change within a relatively short period of time.
What does it mean?
So there again, a sense of how the economy is changing with the rupture that Prime Minister Carney keeps on speaking about. And as we saw here at the beginning, the introduction of the concept of things being unsustainable, being asked specifically what it means, nothing good. Clearly, but not precise. And, in economics, unsustainable is a very specific term. But you'll notice, again, from the past two clips to this one, the evolution in the language, all in the space of 1 week. The clip from the testimony and three different demeanors that we are noticing. One that's a little more outgaging, one that has a little more gravitas, and then the one a committee that has a little bit of showmanship, right? Kit Linda M put, I think this parliamentary budget officer likes having the cameras on him. Possibly. That's possible. He's still new to this, so this part of it. So you can give a little slack, but possibly. And like I said, none of this explains the sharp difference, because if the deficit, the annual deficit, was in the 50 billions, and we were looking at, there was a promise not to exceed 62, and we're going to exceed 62, but not go over 70. And there was a lot of people talking about 185 and that type of stuff. Yes, it's not great, right? But is that little bit amount more? A little bit, I'm saying. It's like, yeah, it could be up to $20 billion when I'm saying a little bit. Less than, well, $10 to $20 billion more. But yeah, budget terms are relative, I guess. But for that amount more, would it be such a big deal, especially when we just had an assessment from Yves Giroux, the former parliamentary budget officer, that said we could add $46 billion a year and still pretty much, handle it. And here we're talking adding 10 to 20 more. So we're still far from 46. So that's the discrepancy when I'm hearing the numbers. And I'm thinking, like, well, how does he get to shocking and unsustainable and stupefying when it's nowhere near the 46? And how did that change so much in the space of just a couple of months? right? Um, but you get that sense here from some of his answers. Vashi, I'm going to rewind it a little bit too, because I cut off the beginning of Vashi Kavalos' next question. But of course, she just asked what happens if you go over the cliff, and he's talking here about changes to the world order, which creates a situation, in a sense, where you know we have no choice but to adapt to those changes that have been suddenly inflicted upon us and imposed on us. And those changes do come with costs, which again creates the situation for Pierre. But on what would you not spend then? Right? Because it can't just be all spending is bad, right? And all spending is inflationary and therefore it's terrible and we shouldn't do it. There's got to be something, right? There's got to be something more. All right. Let's look at what else he has to say on this particular matter.
So, in short, it means a lot of change within a relatively short period of time.
What does it mean for the near term or the more immediacy, though, as far as impacts on both the economy and what you're looking at, the fiscal outlook? And I ask because in response to some of your analysis, for example, the federal finance minister focused on, look, we're kind of in an emergency, I'm paraphrasing, but we're going to need to provide certain supports and ensure that our economy can withstand that. I sort of interpret that as, we will have to spend more than we would have liked to, let's say, because we have to address the imperative that this trade war with the United States has created and the sort of shock factor to our economy. How much wiggle room do they actually have to do that, in your view?
It is a very narrow path. It's a very narrow path, and it's going to require both consideration of shifting spending within the federal government, in addition to reducing spending or potentially cutting programs in some areas, as well as potentially some consideration around increases in revenues, in order to make sure that the Canadian economy, Canada, is actually able to navigate that very narrow path.
If I try to understand that in sort of layman's terms again, does that mean that, essentially they can't just add those emergency measures? They're going to have to take something away.
In order to be sustainable and reduce certainly the anxiety we have in the office, and I think provide a certain amount of comfort both to other members of Parliament, other parliamentarians, Canadians writ large, there's going to have to be some sort of substantial change at this point. I think for myself, I always think of it the best analogy being, you go into your doctor's office, you've had a bunch of tests in advance, your doctor sits you down and she says, yeah, well, there are a bunch of bad indicators on your blood and other bodily fluids, and if you continue everything you're doing right now, you're not going to end up in a good place and not where you want to be. So you need to make some lifestyle changes at this point. And for the federal government, potentially it's going on a bit of a diet in terms of some areas of spending. Potentially they want to bulk up on the defense side and expand those areas. And potentially they also want to consider, taking on additional hours at the office so they can increase their revenues all at the same time.
Do you mean new taxes?
I guess we'll see. There are multiple options with respect to revenues.
Okay.
All right. So here, him mentioning that we probably are going to need to find a way to increase revenues. I'm guessing that the Prime Minister is expecting over time it would come from additional economic activity and investment from his plan coming up, and coming into fruition. But I don't know if there are any other measures at the moment that are planned in terms of a more straightforward revenue increasing mechanism here with that. But again, they're talking about, in the more immediacy here, given the example of a patient that, there are certain things that there are certain changes you need to make now if you do not want the future outcome to be that which we're predicting. And that's something else that you have to keep in mind, because it's one of those things that the Conservatives do when they get this type of data. The data that is always presented when they say that we're on a sustainable track suggests that if we continue on this pace and change nothing, course, a government can adapt and make changes to changing situations. So when the Conservatives run with the number and say, oh my God, we're on the track to unsustainability, we're on the track of unsustainability if we do nothing to change that. That's the other part. That's the part that they always omit from it. And clearly, the Prime Minister believes that investing in Canada and trying to increase our export capacity, signing all those deals with all the other nations, hopefully shifting trade routes, diversifying our economic partners, entering new industries, all that type of stuff, is the type of things that will make it such that situation that some are choosing to see at the moment as unsustainable does indeed become sustainable, right? Once the budget comes down and all the measures that are in there come into place, the Parliamentary Budget Officer is going to have to take that budget, take those measures, right, and do new calculations and over the longer term and whatnot, and we'll see what we'll get. So this pre-exercise stuff gives people numbers about the current situation to go on, so that they can put what's to come into a certain context, and that they're very valuable for that. I don't think that they're particularly valuable for prediction that this is indeed where we're going, given that there's going to be a whole plan dropped on us on the 4th that explains where it is that we're going. And then we're going to find out how this plan, according to the Parliamentary Budget Office, changes things and on what path it puts us on. But right now, this news is coming out now at this point, and that's what the Conservatives are running with. Again, trying their usual game of winning the nanosecond in order to win the day and try to win every day, rather than try to win the issue and win it in a way that, should they form government themselves one day, they don't start off with their own shoelaces tied because of everything that they've said before, right? Because there are realities to governing. Other people can do things that change your game. You're out there with your best laid plans and you're going to do something, and then another country turns around and goes, nope. And all of a sudden, oh, darn, I can't do that anymore. Now what? Sort of like Alberta, right? I want a pipeline. Yeah, I understand, British Columbia, you presented 22 different projects that could be projects of national importance for consideration, but we only presented the pipeline and pathways, hoping that it would allow us to get a pipeline. But we got nothing else. And then you got Danielle Smith going, well, if other provinces are allowed to make their projects and we're not, there's something wrong. It's not about being allowed. It's that you've decided that you've only wanted one project. It's this or bust, whereas other provinces have submitted a lot of them. They didn't get all of them, but they got some, and now they've got stuff to do. It's not allowed. It's about you not wanting to do the work. It's about you, rather than presenting a whole suite of projects, and some of which could be adopted, wanting to create a situation where they were forced to pick the only one you've put on the table. That assumes you have people that will agree to be forced. If they don't, then you're kind of shit out of luck and your strategy failed. It's so, yeah, you have to do. There are realities to governing, and sometimes you need to do more, and sometimes you're not going to get what you want, and sometimes your plan is not going to work, and you have to be able to adapt on the fly. It's that bit about governments being able to be nimble when they are, usually heavier bureaucracies that are a little slower to turn around. All right. So on this one here, I believe there's going to be a little bit more on the debt to GDP ratio. And of course, it doesn't seem that Kit PNC Bio is with us, but Kit Linda and Kit Bucky are here with us, and they do have a little knowledge here. So Kit Linda M says a stock measurement is at a point in time, while a flow measurement is over a period of time, very basically. And Kit Bucky comes in and says, agrees here with Linda, and says that flow is like your monthly spending. It shows how much you're adding to your financial position. Stock is like your total credit card balance, the cumulative result of past flows. Oh, okay. I understand that now. So Kit Bucky continues, so deficit to GDP tells you how fast the debt is growing or shrinking this year. Debt to GDP tells you how large the debt is compared to the economy. So that's the number that we were using before, debt to GDP, how large the debt is compared to the economy. And it looks like we are going to be switching in terms of an anchor to how fast the deficit is growing or shrinking this year, which again, given my first assessment, given that we are taking on a lot at the moment, a lot more than we should because situations require it, just how far can we go without doing some unsustainable damage to ourselves? And therefore, you might want to look at that other metric for the next, at least probably 5 years, at least. And then more if needed. But yes, on a longer term, if you're looking at 5 years as long term rather than like 20 or 30, but let's say mid to long range. Yeah, that might be there might be cause to want to change to that metric. That is not just trying to pick the metric that makes you look best, but it gives you the metric that lets you know how much leeway you have at any given moment. Just what we're talking about here when the Interim Parliamentary Budget Officer is saying that the leeway is relatively narrow. All right. So let's see what else he has to say specifically with debt to GDP rate.
I did want to ask, because one thing in particular when you're talking about sustainability that you flagged was your projections where debt to GDP are concerned. It's been, there's lots of talk about what's a fiscal anchor, what isn't, all that kind of stuff. One of the ones that has consistently, I think, been identified by the previous government, and in some cases this one already, is the debt to GDP ratio. And often, you flagged that going up over the medium term as a big concern. Often, when I have interviewed, let's say, people in the government about it, the counter has been, and this happened during committee to a certain degree as well, it's still not as bad as other countries. Like, relative to the positioning of other countries, that ratio in Canada is better. Does that matter?
I'm the Canadian Parliamentary Budget Officer, so from my perspective, I'm focused on the Canadian context and not actually being aware of what's going on in the other jurisdictions, but very much focused on the Canadian federal context. And having an increasing debt to GDP ratio over the next 5 years is considerable cause for concern. If for no other reason, as you point out, it has been probably, I would say, the most important mainstay anchor for federal budgetary targets over the past 30 years. And certainly looking at the people that lend money to the country, it's one of the key indicators that they look at as well.
Why is that ratio important?
Well, because it represents two really important things that I think are really intuitive for people. The first is GDP, and that's the size of the economy. So how much stuff are we producing, how wealthy is the economy, and how wealthy are households? And the second is debt. So how much debt do we actually have to pay back? And I think for most people who run their own household budgets, you have a good sense of how much money you're taking in over the course of the year, and what are your payments on either your mortgage, your car loan, and other payments you need to make on a regular basis. And in a situation where the cost of actually servicing or potentially paying down your debt as a share of your overall income, if that's going up over time, it means that you need to make some tough choices regarding, okay, got to pay my mortgage, but potentially I'm not buying chicken this week,
right,
and I'm going to shift to something that's a little bit cheaper.
That's a good way of describing it.
All right, so just there again, a little bit of extra information with regard to debt to GDP and why it matters. And here he closes off with some final thoughts that he has on the situation.
I just have one final question for you. And I know that your analysis included, I think it was up until August the 11th, the spending that had been announced, new items, but there's some stuff that's happened, since then, and I imagine in the budget there will be other, spending initiatives announced. Plus, you've got a spending review underway, and we don't know what the conclusions of that will be. If you were to take a guess at this point about what the impact and the aggregate of that is on your projections, do you think that an even bigger deficit is possible?
It really does depend on what the government decides as part of the budget, because again, there end up being two key moving parts. both on the spending side and on the revenue side. And I think at this point it kind of remains to be seen where they ultimately end up. But certainly something that we're focusing on. The short term is obviously important. We're also really keen to see where the government's targets are over the longer term, and potentially a recommitment to a declining debt to GDP ratio over time.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Mr. Jakes, a pleasure. Thank you for your analysis today.
Thanks for your interest.
Jason Jakes is the Interim Parliamentary Budget Officer. When we come back here on Question Period, U.S. President Donald Trump addressed.
All right, so there we go. Again, expressing, wanting to see what's in the budget and seeing that if the government does get back down to a debt to GDP ratio metric in the future to come. Let's put it that way. All right, so we get to, these are the three interventions that the Interim Parliamentary Budget Officer has had over the space of 1 week. You see how they've changed tone, demeanor, the things that he is emphasizing, the things on which he's putting emphasis at the moment are changing throughout these interviews. Now, we move to one that has, I believe it is the one that has Michael Wernick and Mr. Giroux. Sorry. Again, a thing went off when it wasn't supposed to. So I'm just going to take a look. Yes, there we go. That's the one we have with Michael Wernick and Yves Giroux, who's the former. So Michael Wernick is the former clerk of the Privy Council, and Yves Giroux is the Parliamentary Budget Officer that just left his position about a month ago. So here are some of the first things that they have to say with regard to what is being presented so far.
Ask you about the details of how that can be navigated in a moment. I just want to bring Mr. Giroux in and ask you, I guess from the perspective of someone who has analyzed the growth of the public service, we kind of talk about it in a very political sense, but in a more numbers-based way, how much has the public service grown, let's say, from pre-COVID to post-COVID to now?
Well, it's grown from about 340,000 full-time equivalents in 2014-15 to close to 440,000 full-time equivalents as of I think it's last year, March 2024. That's the latest numbers I have. So it's grown by over 100,000 full-time equivalents in a span of 10 years, which is very impressive. And that suggests that there is potential for reducing the size of the public service. But it will all depend on how it's done and where it is done in order to minimize the impact on service to Canadians. And that will be a very fine balance to find.
Well, that's exactly where I want to take the conversation, how to strike that balance or how to navigate that path. Mr. Wernick, the political discussion so far has talked about, will it be cuts, will it be attrition, a cap, all that kind of thing. You have written that attrition is the worst way to go about it. Why do you think that is the case?
Well, attrition is just relying on a passive pattern of who dies, who gets sick, who takes retirement. It's not going to end up with a public service in the right people in the right places. I would work backwards from what kinds of services and functions you want to offer Canadians, and then you make sure the people are in the right place. If you want to reduce the overall personnel, complement at the same time, that's fine. But you can't just wait for people to leave. I think you have to mindfully, proactively put people where you want them to be. There are parts of government they want to bulk up, parts they're willing to cut. That requires a much more proactive strategy. And I would, rather than rely on waiting for people to leave, I would do what we've done in the past and the private sector often does, which is incentives for people to leave early and prepay some of that attrition.
So I have heard that is on the table, something that's being discussed. If I could follow up with you, Mr. Wernick. What about the idea that could have some of your more experienced people head out the door at a time when you are facing this crisis and might need that? Like, is that Are there other ways to go about reducing numbers that wouldn't see a commensurate loss in experience?
Well, what they're doing now is they're cutting off the supply of new talent. It's the younger, the people that have arrived in the last few years are not being renewed. The students I work with are not being hired, so there'll be a loss at the younger end of the public service, and it's a difficult trade-off. You obviously want some of your experienced workers, but if we're in this situation where you really want to dramatically downsize, I would take measures to preserve as many of the jobs as possible of the young, diverse, digital part of the public service, because they're the ones we're going to need for facing the future.
Mr. Giroux.
All right. So in that clip, they're talking about, as I promised we would get to, the whole aspect of the actual cuts to the public service, which seems to be something that a topic on which a lot of people are focusing, given that the Prime Minister said austerity and the government had initially proposed a cap. In this segment, we got data from the former Parliamentary Budget Officer stating that the size of the public service has grown by about 100,000 people over the last decade. Now, we've had a population growth of 3.5 to 4 million people over the last decade. So you would expect that our public service would need to grow in order to sustain that. And I did some quick and dirty math, and that would have put basically, if we looked divided the size of the public service per capita before where we were 10 years ago, and then brought in these new people, how much brought in these new people. Some were born here too. We have these new residents, and how much proportionally would the public service have to grow? It comes in at around 375,000. We're at 440. So there are some people could see indeed that there might be a little too much. We did need some help at some point during COVID. I'm sure some additional help to move things around, but I'm not sure if that amount of growth is all related to that, or if it was just other things that we added programs and just decided not to cut anything, which can happen because cuts are unpopular. But yes, and in this answer, of course, Michael Wernick, as the former clerk of the Privy Council, explaining the limits of relying on attrition. And other ways that you could do it, attrition through incentivization to pare down certain departments more quickly than you would need to for those who are needed. That's where it's needed, but there's also, the retooling and reskilling and whatnot to move people in the public service to other positions that could also be played there. But yes, I would not assume that a central banker like Mark Carney would have a policy of only just waiting for people to die off or retire and then say that's good enough, and not actually look at the whole composition of the public service to make sure that it's there. And of course, an interesting side debate that was there, and it's a perspective we don't hear often because we often talk about, if you're incentivizing people to go, you lose all the experience. Yes, you do lose some experience, and there's some knowledge management stuff to take care of, make sure that you're not losing all the knowledge with them. If you're losing the experience, that there's some way to put that knowledge that they tacitly have in their head into some type of explicit format that can be retrieved afterwards, so that the company, not the company in this case, that the public service can grow and keep on improving and not have to reinvent the wheel. But we do have new people coming in with energy and who have learned new methods, new processes, and that type of stuff. If we keep people with a lot of experience there too long, we also deny opportunities to bring in new energy, new ideas, new ways of thinking, new ways of problem solving, which could also be of benefit in a rapidly changing world. So the trade-off, when you lose things on both ends, right? It's not just one or the other, and therefore, as you mentioned, it's a trade-off. You have to balance these things, and I really do like the word trade-off when it comes to this. You're losing a bit of this to gain that if you do it, but if you don't do it, you keep a little bit of this, but you don't gain that. And then you got to sit there and you got to decide, well, based on what you perceive the needs to be for the future, which of those two things is going to be the better course for you going forward. And not all situations result in the same decision. Now, here we get, I'm going to skip over the next little part because it's Mr. Giroux basically bolstering the previous point with regard to attrition. But we're going to move more to Vashi Capellos asking about what the risks are if we don't get it right in terms of the exercise that we've got going forward here in order to not only assure our finances are fine, but that we have the public service that is needed to achieve the goals that we are now pursuing in this changing economy.
What are the stakes, Mr. Wernick, of not getting the balance right? I think there's this, again, like political discussion going on about a bloated bureaucracy and, things getting out of hand after COVID and things like that. And again, that's very political. But like for people who are at home who rely on many government services, like what are the stakes of getting it wrong?
Well, you're going to have to make choices. Every single one of those employees, and 60% of them are spread across the country and not here in Ottawa, they're attached to a program, a service, a function, a profession, a location. So I think governments can't duck their responsibility to make those choices. I think the other factor that people will notice is, unlike 1995 or 2012, the other big downsizings that Eve and I went through, this one's taking place with the backdrop of AI. And AI is changing professions and occupations right across the economy and certainly within the public service. So I think you also have to layer in technology and equipping people, with AI tools to do their jobs. And I've also called for a doubling of investment in training. If you shed 20% of the workforce, let's increase the training and the technology and the tools to the 80% that stay.
Mr. Giroux, final question to you, and it's about the budget in particular, just because this entire discussion is framed against that backdrop. We're a month less a day away from the budget dropping. Do you agree with the person who's replaced you that we're on the precipice of some kind of fiscal cliff?
Well, I would probably personally wait until we see what's in the budget before making such a statement. I think, for my part, it's a bit premature, but my successor, said what he said, so he probably maybe has different information, but from what I see and from the information that I've been exposed to, I would rather wait until the budget is stable to see exactly what the fiscal track looks like for the foreseeable future, what types of measures the government wants to implement on the spending, but also on the revenue side that may or may not plug the fiscal gap that we're expecting to see. So we'll have a much better idea of that on the evening of November 4.
And there you have it. And that last particular answer from the former Parliamentary Budget Officer Yves Giroux does stand in very, very stark contrast from what the interim one is saying right now. Yves Giroux believing that this type of assessment is premature, and again saying, opening the door to the possibility, hey, I've been gone for a month or so, maybe he's seen something different than I have, but based on what I remember a month ago, my memory's probably not that bad. I have 1 month recall. I don't recognize this as the assessment. And again, some good comments here in the chat about, central bankers and parliamentary budget officers perhaps wanting to restrict the number of media appearances that they have and only come out at very specific times, or when there is actually something to say, and not to provide some running commentary. Because with the manner in which things are changing and the speed at which they're changing, it kind of makes it hard to have a constant through line narrative for what's going on. There are people you want giving you the daily, but there are people that more people that you would want, coming out at more judicious times, and perhaps less frequently, and making sure that they are always looking more at the bigger and broader picture than the immediacy. You always have to be able to speak to the immediacy, but then take it and put it within the context of a much longer looking lens. All right. The last segment that we have for you is Kevin Page, who is our first parliamentary budget officer. And he is, while Mr. Giroux was still pretty clear that he sees things a little differently, there isn't a ton of distance that would make you go, ooh, He, at worst, he said that things were a little premature. But with Kevin Page, he takes more of a stance. Now, before we get to him, there's a presentation in this clip. This is from CBC Power and Politics that will show you some numbers with regard, I'm hoping that I got it right, that it is debt to GDP and not deficit to GDP. No, these are projected deficits and projected debt as so still debt to GDP, not deficit to GDP. So this is still the numbers that we are used to seeing, and it has a couple of clips of the PBO in parliamentary as well, at parliamentary committee delivering his presentation. Whoops. Okay. That didn't work. Let's try that again. One more time. That should be better.
Prime Minister Mark Carney's first federal budget is just 1 month away, and according to the Interim Parliamentary Budget Officer, the deficit number is shaping up to be ugly. At a parliamentary committee last week, Jason Jakes issued a dire warning.
We project the budgetary deficit will be $68.5 billion. That's billion with a B. We project the federal debt to GDP ratio will be 42.5% of GDP this year.
How alarming is that for the average Canadian, for the taxpayer? Because there is only one taxpayer, right?
Stupefying, shocking, right? This is not, it's not a funny fiscal outlook. It's a really serious fiscal outlook.
Are we closer?
And now I will remind you that this was the guy who, about a week before this testimony, was on TV saying that doesn't want to be prone to hyperbole. You can make your own assessment as to whether or not that sounded like the words of someone who is not prone to hyperbole.
Are we closer to where we were in the mid-90s than we were 10 years ago?
The numbers in the mid-90s were far more alarming. If we don't change things, we're going to end up there again.
When do you project the budget to be balanced?
Is that a trick? Is that a trick question? A very long time. Again, the current status quo is not sustainable.
Well, as Jakes mentioned there, the PBO projects the deficit will jump to $68.5 billion next year, and it will stay above $60 billion for several years to come. That would be enough to change one of Canada's key so-called fiscal anchors, the debt to GDP ratio. Now, the Trudeau Liberals were committed to keeping the size of Canada's debt compared to the size of the economy in decline in the medium term. But under the PBO's projection, that ratio will rise above 43%.
So there, kits and cubs, as you can see on the data, and for those who are listening at home, it's showing that debt to GDP ratio will grow from 41.7% in 2024-2025 to 42.5% in 25-26, 43.3% in 26-27, 43.6% in 27-28, and 43.7%. So it's a continuously rising debt to GDP ratio, which is why it is that the federal government would probably want to be looking at a deficit to GDP in terms of to get a better sense of how things are going now in that instance. But when you're looking at straight debt numbers, it is $51.7 billion 2024 to 2025, $68.5 billion deficit 2025-26, and then the deficit decreases. So even though it will stay above 60 billion for the foreseeable future, it's 64.2 billion in 26-27, 62.1 in 27-28, 60.1 in 28-29. That's what is projected. So while if things remained on this path of decreasing deficits in terms of the real number, and right, as we see here, but then with the debt to GDP, as you see here, as you get closer, 43.6 to 46.7, you can see if these two numbers would continue, how this number on the debt to GDP ratio would level off and start decreasing, all other things remaining equal, of course, which probably never happens, especially in the space of 5 or 6 years. But you could perhaps see on this graph for fiscal year 2029, 2030, that the debt to GDP ratio might start decreasing at that point if the debt numbers would also continue decreasing based on what has been shown there. So that's some of the stuff that is out there. And then we get to Kevin Page being asked some questions. I just thought that those numbers were very interesting. And he is asked first about the rising debt to GDP ratio. And I want you to pay attention to his answers, because Kevin Page, one of the things I liked about him when he was our Parliamentary Budget Officer is that not only was he very clear, he's how would I put it? He's economical enough with words to make it such that not only is it clear, but it's a lot seems very tempered. He was really not prone to flights of exaggeration in any way, shape, or form. So here we are, Mr. Kevin Page.
Kevin Page is a former Parliamentary Budget Officer and President of the Institute of Fiscal Studies and Democracy. Kevin Page, always good to see you. Thank you for coming in, sir.
Good to be with you.
We're not going to see the federal budget for another month, but there's a lot of firm opinions on it well in advance. How fair is the PBO's assessment that the fiscal situation is stupefying and not sustainable?
Yeah, I don't agree with those words. The deficit definitely is going up from 2024-25. I think that the numbers that were in the PBO document are probably close to what the Prime Minister will see as his baseline, the Minister of Finance. So it is a higher deficit than we've seen in a while. But it's you put the deficit and debt in perspective. It's we're not in a bad place with respect to other countries. With respect to our credit rating, we're actually in a pretty good place.
How the phrase "not sustainable"? That is one that jumps out to me, right? Stupefying means whatever you want it to mean, but sustainability has a very specific meaning when it comes to government finances and the state of the budget. And I'm not trying to suggest the numbers are good, but they've been far worse in the past, in the 1990s, for example. So where are you on the sustainability definition of where things are?
Yeah, so I think we need to see the budget, and we'll see the Minister of Finance, the Prime Minister's, the measures. There'll be some version of what we saw in the platform, so it'll be a higher deficit track going out. I think like the definition that economists, bond raters use for sustainability is usually looking at the debt of the country, the accumulated deficit, and relative to the size of the economy. So what we see over the medium term right now in terms of this baseline is a very modest increase in the debt to GDP ratio, then it stabilizes. I think the analysis that we've seen from finance, from the PBO, from IMF last year is that Canada is fiscally sustainable. I don't think that's going to change when we see the numbers from Prime Minister Carney and Minister Champagne.
Okay. Okay, so in this one, we have a definitely clear and distinct different take. Whereas Mr. I'm going to say Jacques for now until I know different or know better. But Mr. Jacques saying that, we're not over the cliff, but looking over it, that things are not sustainable. And here, Kevin Page stating that he definitely does not see that. We definitely have a little more wiggle room. It's not as tight as the current interim PBO is claiming here. And, you know, uh, and he was the current PBO didn't want to take too much into account about how these numbers relate to other countries, how they appear in different countries, and how they are relative to ours. For the former parliamentary budget officer, these things are important enough in context that they should be mentioned and factored in. All right, so we continue here where we're talking a little bit about the weaker economy itself here.
Okay, so the outlook from the Parliamentary Budget Officer assumes no new measures are introduced, and it doesn't include potential savings from the spending review that's been going on. It does not, yeah. Yes. That will really kick in next year. But it also doesn't include the future commitments on defense spending and getting to 5% to meet the NATO target. So there is a real potential, but for this to change. But in the short term, on the spending review and new measures, I mean, how much deviation do you think we could see in a month?
Yeah, I think, we're going to see a first installment of the spending review package in the budget. And, so they've been working, the government department's been working on over the summertime. We'll see, preliminary, measures. I think in the platform they talked about getting $30 billion over 4 years. I think with this, with weaker economy and with the NATO commitments and the commitment to get to an operating balance in 4 years, they're going to need to do more spending cuts, some more reallocation. And, we'll see some of that in this budget, but we'll see it in future budgets as well. It's not an environment to raise taxes, so the Prime Minister, Finance Minister are going to work hard to cut spending.
Well, they've already cut a bunch of taxes this year too, right? Income tax, capital gains, inclusion, and digital services tax, amongst others. But you talked about the weakening economy.
So in this part here, the former parliamentary budget officer making the point that in the particular economy with the particular dynamics that are going on right now wouldn't be the time to, if we're looking to increase revenues, to do it by increasing taxes. We'd have to do it through another method. And now we get to the weakening economy.
And we talk about a growing deficit. So both of those things are connected. I mean, is the bigger pressure on the deficit spending, or is it the revenue hit that's been caused by all this disruption by the U.S. trade war?
Yeah, it's both. I mean, I think the outlook now for this year and next year from the PBO, from the OECD, from the Bank of Canada, is kind of growth in the 1% range. That's very slow growth. That means we're operating well below our potential. So in that environment, it's not unusual to see a deficit. It's not a deficit is quite natural. In fact, it's helpful to help stabilize the economy. So I think it's definitely both. We've seen, it's been the previous government under Prime Minister Trudeau definitely increased spending at a pretty fast clip. Particularly in that area of other transfers, grants and contributions. So we're going to need to kind of slow the growth of that part of the budget.
They had a fiscal anchor under the Trudeau government. That was the debt to GDP ratio. The commitment was that it would decline over time, and for various reasons, it moved and got missed and these sorts of things. Prime Minister Carney insists he has them. We don't know exactly what those are going to be. I mean, what markers should we be looking for in the budget to see whether this is a responsible and sustainable plan?
Well, the Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance, they committed to get to something called an operating balance. So we're not going to be deficit financing current consumption, current spending. all the big transfers to persons, other levels of government, the grants and contributions that are going to be consumed in the current year, they're going to be paid for. So that's effectively an operating balanced budget. I think the Prime Minister said, the Minister of Finance said, we'll run small deficits, less than 2 percentage points of GDP for capital investment only. They're going to define, they will see the definition in the budget. And to me, if they could hit that target, we'll have a declining debt to GDP ratio. I think in addition to that target, I think it would be useful for them to show us, have some commitments along the way in terms of hitting targets, nominal balances, what will the deficit be next year, the year after. They could have spending control in certain parts of the budget to help us feel more confident. They could build reserves in as well in terms of getting to that target. But overall, it's not a bad fiscal picture. Every country, because of the weaker global economy, because of the NATO commitments, every country is experiencing some upward deficit pressure right now.
Right. Well, but okay, overall, it's not a bad.
So again, putting it in the context of the overall economy and global economy, that other countries are facing similar pressure, but again, expressing confidence that sort of what I was hinting based on those numbers, that, with the current situation, yes, we do have to make some investments, but that we are definitely still on track and in line for declining debt to GDP ratio, in eventual terms here on this one. So he doesn't seem as panicked. So that's why I'm saying it's like we have two parliamentary budget officers having two very different lines of rhetoric. And while Kevin Page, yes, is not currently in the position, still, he did the job extremely well, especially being the first one and set the tone for the office and did that rather well. And he doesn't see the cause for panic. He doesn't see the cause. So, it's party time and, let's all go streaking. But yes, but we do have the leeway to take on the additional capital expenses that are required for the situation as it's presenting itself, and then making the case here that if you can show restraint in certain parts of the budget, like let's say the operational part, for example, then that will increase confidence with regard to the other portions of the budget, particularly, again, if it could be made very clear that these are indeed capital expenditures that are going to have, or for the purposes of having a future benefit that is wealth generating and wealth creating. All right, let's keep on going with this one.
Bad fiscal picture. Former parliamentary budget officer saying that versus stupefying and not sustainable. You see the political arguments that sort of assessment has unleashed. I mean, when Canadians hear that, we see the opposition raising concerns about Canada's AAA credit rating maybe being at risk because of this. I mean, what should they think?
Well, I think the language from the current parliamentary budget officer, Mr. Jason Jakes, is just wrong. And he should walk that back, quite frankly. He should take those. He should tell people that those are, our fiscal situation is sustainable. And I think that the other language of those other words, stupefy, shocking. It's not. You wouldn't see a governor of the Bank of Canada or the Auditor General use that kind of language. So I think that's not the right language. And so I'm sure Mr. Jakes will change. We'll see less of that kind of language. I think it's definitely inflamed certain passions around Canada's fiscal situation that I think are not consistent with the numbers.
Right. So it's not the type of language I've heard you use. It's not the type of language I presume you would have used.
So again, very, very clear here. Kevin Page not being ambiguous at all, actually outright saying that the current interim parliamentary budget officer is wrong. Again, in this world, that is seismic as a statement, right? In a world where people tend to be rather conservative, actually standing up and saying, the guy who's supposed to be presenting you a conservative estimate is wrong. Just wrong. is not a conservative statement. It's a pretty bold one. But yes, there you go. You're getting the other perspective. And again, David Cochrane making the point that as well in terms of language and exuberance of language, let's put it that way, that he has never heard Kevin Page speak in that sense. And back to that previous point that I was mentioning as well, Kevin Page says, okay, there was an anchor of keeping debt to GDP ratio in below 1%. But he's basically saying that if it is in between 1 and 2%, as it will be, but the reason that is in 1 to 2% because is we are making major capital expenditures. So in other words, what we're spending the money on matters. That could be a wealth and income generating in the future. Then with those types of expenses between that range, because we are still on a sustainable track and still on a track to eventual numbers that come in year after year with a lowering debt to GDP ratio. And that's specifically what we are doing. That's the plan, is to reduce the operational expenses and put more into the capital side. Yes, pushing us past 1%. So that's why looking at the deficit to GDP. So how much or how are we able to afford this extra boost in spending that we're giving? And if at any time, if the numbers change rather suddenly, we could pull back rather suddenly so that we don't affect too adversely the debt to GDP ratio on the long term. So it seems that the Prime Minister, from what I'm understanding here, and the great explanations from Kit P&C Bio, who has joined us and has confirmed a lot of things that Bucky and Linda have been saying, with adding a little extra color and texture, making it clear to us that he does not have a financial background. But as we know, if you follow on the chat, someone who comments very astutely on financial matters. And we have something in common, Kit P&C Bio. I was also the 77-year-old who spoke like a 22-year-old and was very tedious to those who were raising me, who were trying to teach me stuff. I feel your pain. I feel your pain. All right, so let's get into the last little bit here of what the former Parliamentary Budget Officer Kevin Page has to say.
But does it distort how bad things are? Because, I mean, they aren't great. They are challenging. I don't think anyone's disagreeing with that. But it's not the Paul Martin, Jean Chrétien crisis of the 90s.
Yeah, and that crisis was dealt with, and Canada was put in really was given a fiscal advantage thanks to Prime Ministers Chrétien and Martin. Again, if you look at the numbers right now, a deficit, a baseline deficit of about a little over 2 percentage points. That's a third of what it is in the U.S. and the U.K., and it's well below the OECD average. If you look at our deficit, our debt, debt to GDP ratio, we're probably it'll be the lowest of the G7. If you look at the carrying costs of debt, interest charges divided by revenues, it's 11 cents on every revenue dollar right now. That is a third of what it was for Prime Minister Chrétien and Martin, and we're a AAA country. So, like, where do you see, shocking? It's not shocking to see a deficit go up because the economy is slowing and we have NATO commitments. To me, it's sustainable. I think when they do the analysis, everybody's going to do this analysis, including finance. We'll see it in the budget. We're sustainable right now.
You said, just as a final point, you think maybe they should walk it back, the PBO. Have you suggested that to them? Have you talked to them about it? Have you had any response to this? What have they said?
I think they recognize it's a mistake, and I think that's the easy part. I think the part of kind of walking it back, I think that'll be good for the institution. I think they have to walk it back.
Former Parliamentary Budget Officer Kevin Page, thank you so much for your time, sir.
Good to be with you.
And there you have it, Kits and Cubs. Again, the Parliamentary Budget Officer, not being ambiguous in any way, shape, or form, even suggesting that, at least in the response from what I'm getting, that he might have actually been on the phone with the PBO and had a conversation. And maybe the interim PBO had come to a couple of realizations. So it'll be interesting to see when his next public pronouncement will be. If he doesn't have any more testimony before committee, I do not suspect it will come prior to the budget now, because some people might be getting the sense, dude, you've just done enough damage. Thank you. You might want to pull back here on this one. But yeah, absolutely. And of course, the former parliamentary budget officer, again, making it clear that if we have a slowing economy, and well, that's when you expect government to spend a lot more. And then we've taken on some additional NATO commitments that we intend to fulfill. What else would you expect to happen to the budget? Right? This is a normal thing. But then you have to do it in a way that is sound. And it seems at the moment that the manner that is planned to do this is sound. Of course, not everybody has all the details yet, but at first blush, he sees no cause for concern here. All right, kids and cubs. That's the end of this episode of the Daily Beaver Morning Show. We hope that you love listening to us because we love making this for you. Remember, sharing is caring and word of mouth is priceless. So please tell your peeps and poops all about us. We really appreciate it when you do, kids and cubs. And I also saw a thing go by, so let's do it now, saying, I can't believe nobody has talked about the Jays. And of course, our wonderful Blue Jays played their first two matches of the playoffs over the course of the weekend, and against the New York Yankees, over whom they have an 8-5 lead on the season series so far in regular season play. Well, now we can make that 10-5, including playoffs, because the Blue Jays really handled the Yankees on Saturday afternoon with a 10-1 victory. 14 hits for the Jays versus 6 for the Yankees on the day, and 3 home runs, which certainly doesn't hurt. So a great match there for the Toronto Blue Jays. And then they followed it up the very next day with a 13-7 victory. So even though the New York Yankees bats were working a little better, unfortunately for them, the Blue Jays bats worked even better. And it was the New York Yankees showed up after the 6th inning. Their 7 runs came in the 6th and the 7th, but the Blue Jays had already accumulated their 15 runs. Sorry, I don't know why it's 15 hits. Sorry. Not runs, had already accumulated their 13 runs by the end of the 6th inning. So a pretty definitely a statement. Both of them statement victories from there. And yeah, I'm not sure if this was 5 home runs for the Jays or 5 runs scored thanks to home runs. But I'm thinking this is 5 home runs because there's a runs batted in number here right below it. So yeah, wow, that would have been something. So yeah, they're up 2-0 on the series, and yeah, next game is on Tuesday night, if I am not mistaken. So good stuff for the Jays there. And since let's do a little bit of making us proud right where we were here while we're at it. Felix Auger-Aliassime is still winning in Shanghai, and he has advanced to the 8th of finals here, and will take on Musetti from Italy in that round. So doing very well. Denis Shapovalov lost to Yuri Lehechka in the round of 16 there. And Victoria Moboko and Leila Annie Fernandez are both on tonight in Shanghai, but with Moboko today and Fernandez tonight, but with a tough first round draws with people that are ranked higher than they are, both of them in the first round. Bianca Andreescu won her first round of qualification, but lost in her second round and did not advance to the main draw of the tournament, unfortunately for her. All right. So Kids and Cubs, as well as sharing our content. If you would like us to help you, if you are a busy beaver or busy bear on the go, you can take us with you thanks to the Ray Girl, who sponsors our pod page. Podpage.com/the True North Eager Beaver, a hyphen between each one of those words. And you can scan that QR code too. That also appeared. And when you go there, that brings you to our pod page, and there's a button there called subscribe. And when you click on it, when we have a fresh podcast for you, right off the podcast feed and directly waiting for you in your feed, from our feed to yours. And then you can put us in your ears and go for a walk or go take on the day. And that way you don't have to be tied to your computer to watch. You can take us with you. Thanks, Ray Girl, for helping us with that. Now, if you'd like to help us in other ways, Kids and Cubs, True North Eager Beaver YouTube page needs your help, and Kits, Cassie, and Elaine are beckoning you to surf on down and come and play with our buttons, like, share, and subscribe. Give them a little tickle. I think our latest advertising campaign has now closed because the new subscribers are coming in less quickly as they do when we have an advertising hit on. So help us get to 27,000 Kits and Cubs. We would really appreciate that. And when you click like, share, and subscribe, not only does it make us happy, but it also helps us with the algorithm. So thank you, Kits and Cubs. If you would like to help us in other ways, we do incur some costs to bring the show to you, and we are hoping to reach our goal of breaking even this year. And you can help with that by making an enthusiastic expression of encouragement via our coffee page, or in other words, a contribution to the Eager Beaver Lodge Emergency Hydration Fund, where you can do your bit to help keep your favorite beaver moist, because a moist beaver is a happy beaver. Moisture. Yum, yum. Bringer of joy. Bringer of joy. And you can do that via our coffee page. That QR code that appeared will bring you right there. Coffee, ko-fi.com/eagerbeaver. I forgot how to spell coffee. And that's Eager Beaver, all in one word. And you can go there and drop a couple of loonies or toonies into our tip jar. And when we hear that sound clanging, it brings us a lot of joy. I don't know if you're hearing all that noise, Kids and Cubs. I think there are some trucks outside that are mulching some tree branches, and it's making a lot of noise, making it hard for me to concentrate. I just don't know if the mic is picking it up. If it is, that is the sound you are hearing. So I'll try to speed through this quickly here so that you don't get all that sound. So yes, please do make a donation. We really appreciate it, or via our super chat or buy a membership on our YouTube page if you're there. And of course, if you are buying Canadian, True North Eager Beaver @gmail.com is our email address where you can make a direct bank-to-bank transfer, avoid the CE Tech Bros, and make sure we get 100% of your donation. All right, Kids and Cubs, because democracy is something that you do, forever-canadian.ca. If you're in Alberta, they have revealed some interim numbers because they had a first signing session that went to the end of September, and they have a second signature session that takes place in October, and they had a couple of days gap in between. They've announced that they've collected, I think, 230,000 of the 294 or 300,000, let's say round it up, that they need in order to get that question on the Citizens Initiative ballot. So a few more to go and a whole other month to get them. So let's go far beyond 300,000 if we can, to send a very, very strong message to Danielle Smith. But thank you to all of the Albertans who have showed up to sign, who have organized to collect the signatures, and to all Canadians who have donated to Forever Canadian to help fund their work and have supported it and spread the word. All very important. It's nice to see democracy in action. And thank you, Kids and Cubs. And since we are talking about democracy in action, please don't forget petition number E6679. And that's to have a little more honesty in politics. And tomorrow we will be having, not live on the show, it will be a pre-record conversation with the person who spearheaded this petition that we will be able to bring to you on our show very, very soon. But the petition's at 31,892 signatures. And I remember when we first started talking about it, it was just over 10,000. So hopefully by us talking about it and you sharing it with your circle, you are doing the little bit that needs to be done to make sure that we get a lot of attention brought to this and maybe get some action. So I'm going to include the link again in the chat for you, Kits and Cubs. Please, if you haven't signed it yet, do so, and please share with your circle. Kits and Cubs, Newfoundland and Labrador, October 14th, coming up now, 8 more days, will be a provincial election. So please make sure that you get out there and vote and get familiar with your candidates. Also, on the 8th, if you're in St. John's, the municipal election that was delayed in your city will take place. So do show up to vote for that as well. And of course, November 3rd as well in the Yukon Territory, there will be an election there as well. So lots of elections going on there. And also, yeah, on that front, I believe the P.E.I. Liberals have indeed chosen their new leader over the course of the weekend because there was a vote for that. And according to CBC, that is Mr. Robert Mitchell, who was chosen, according here to Cody McKay of the CBC. Longtime MLA Robert Mitchell is locked in as new leader, winning the P.E.I. Liberal Party's leadership early Saturday evening. Mitchell won with 2,372 votes, or 82.3%. Todd Cormier's 509 votes, 17.6%. In total, 2,882 ballots were cast, of a 90.3% turnout, according to the party, and there was one spoiled ballot. Voting took place online. Results were released shortly before 5:30 p.m. Quote, "I'm ready to go. I'm ready to start tomorrow," Mitchell told CBC News moments after his victory. He said next up is visiting all 27 districts across PEI again to identify Liberal candidates for the next provincial election. The date for that is fall 2027, but could be called much sooner. Quote, "We have work to do, but we have enthusiasm, we have momentum, we have districts that are ready to get back to where we were just a short time ago, bring the Liberal brand to the forefront," he said in an interview. "I'm ready, they're ready, we're going at it, and we're going at it hard." Mitchell is a former MLA under then Premiers Robert Giz and Wade McLaughlin, holding roles later in his time as Minister of Health and Wellness and Minister of Communities, Land and Environment. Speaking to a roaring crowd of hundreds packed together in a conference room at a Charlottetown hotel, Mitchell thanked his family, friends, and loud team of supporters. He made a promise that the Liberal Party would be a party for every Islander. Quote, "We're here to listen to you. I'm here to listen to you," he said in his speech. "Together we can build a bright future. Together we can rise. Let's get to work." Speech leading up to the results were from Hal Perry, the interim leader, followed by Andrew Furey, the former Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador. Oh, that was nice of him to show up for that. Perry made reference to ongoing crises in healthcare and other sectors, saying, quote, "By every measure, things have gotten worse since his party lost previous elections." Quote, "This government doesn't know what they're doing," Perry said to the crowd. "Islanders deserve better than that. They deserve leadership that listens, that works, and that doesn't disappear when the going gets tough. That's what Liberals are, and that's why we're all here. This leadership race has been more about than just choosing a leader. It's about rebuilding our foundation, reigniting our passion, and reuniting the party." Accomplishing that, he and others referenced throughout the evening, was by capturing, quote, "momentum." An ongoing theme throughout speeches and tagline for the leadership convention, quote, "Momentum is ours," partly a reference to the party's recent by-election win in District 9, Charlottetown Hillsborough Park. Carolyn Simpson won that seat for the Liberals with 47% of the vote, a victory that was a springboard of political energy going into the tail end of the leadership campaign. Fury followed Perry, saying, "Change is in the air, and the leadership convention is a new chapter for the party." Quote, "The beginning of a movement that puts Islanders first," he said, "the beginning of momentum, the beginning of putting people, not politics, back at the heart of a new government." Saturday marked the end of a leadership campaign that stretched through the summer and into the fall. 2 people put their name forward for the leadership. This was the first contestant leadership for the PEI Liberals since the early 2000s and the first time the party used online voting. The Liberals hold 4 seats in PEI and are the official opposition. So there you go. And also on the leadership front, Kits and Cubs, in Saskatchewan, there was a leadership confirmation for the leader of the Saskatchewan NDP, Carla Beck, and she has passed it resoundingly with well over 80% support, 87.2 percent support to be exact, which is pay attention, leaders of parties who got voted out of their seats, who are still trying to hold on, despite not getting 2/3 or barely crossing 2/3. This is what a mandate actually looks like: 87.2% support from the party. So there you go. And speaking of leadership stuff, hopefully we'll be able to have Mr. Nathaniel Arfin come back on the show to talk to us following what went on with the Ontario Liberals and their change of leader as well. All right, so that's all the democracy stuff. Words of wisdom, kids and cubs. Get some sleep. Don't lose things because you're sleepy. That's the extent of my wisdom today. I'm sorry, I got nothing for you, really. Kids and cubs, it could be a tough world out there, so please be kind to and gentle with yourselves. And now, audience participation. Could you please, kids and cubs, at the count of 3, say, "Mr. Beaver, please cue the cock." On 1, 2, 3. A chorus of kits, so melodiously asking for what they want. As your queen, I must comply. You are listening to a True North Eager Beaver Media Incorporated podcast. The True North Eager Beaver podcasts are proudly brought to you by our founding sponsors: The Misfit Mysteries from Corvid Moon Publishing, your source for science fiction, fantasy, and cozy mysteries featuring a broad diversity of characters; CanadianTarot.com, their uniquely Canadian online eclectic tarot community; and The Peppermaster, hot pepper sauces made from farm-fresh ingredients to thrill your taste buds and expand your mind. We are grateful to the Crier Media Network for its support, Pete Jarvis for our artwork, and Paul Joseph Something for our opening and closing sequence music. All right, kids and cubs, no real big Easter egg for you today, but just going to mention it because it's happening. The Prime Minister will be taking a plane to go off to Washington, D.C. today to meet with Donald Trump. Further advance whatever the trade negotiation is. Some people worried that it could be setting us up for a trap this time, considering how mercurial the mood of the president has been, and how things have not been going particularly well for him lately, particularly with his approval numbers, and the fact that he's been mentioning 51st state again, and you have a couple of people making those little statements about stuff like human smuggling and whatnot that could give the impression, are they preparing the terrain to Ukraine us? And from other sectors, we're hearing that there might be an announceable on some movement on steel and aluminium tariffs, because the United States are starting to be affected pretty much by it too, and want to reduce the pressure. And if that's the case, then the Prime Minister would be coming back with some type of win that he could turn around to Pierre and go, "Yeah, in your face." But he probably won't do that, or at least not in that way. So remains to be seen. But of course, we'll be talking about more of that tomorrow, no doubt. So have a beaverific day, everyone. And like magic, I am gone.